What's up, everyone? I'm back for another review. I apologize for the lack of videos in the past couple of weeks. I've been very busy with a lot of stuff on my hand. And also, I was going to try to get this video up sooner, but unfortunately I was hit with a little bit of a cold. But now that I'm feeling better, I feel like now is the perfect opportunity for me to actually talk about some of the films I've watched over the weekend. So let's not waste any more time and get started. The first movie I'm going to be talking about is the newest film from the hit horror franchise, Evil Dead Rise. If you've been keeping up with the videos I posted, you might know that I am kind of a big Evil Dead fan. I mean, enough of a fan to make my own little ranking of Sam Raimi movies, just so I can gloat about how awesome Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2 are. When discussions of a new Evil Dead surfaced, I was curious about what they might do with it, but not necessarily excited for it. It might be partially because I'll be the first to admit I wasn't too crazy about the last Evil Dead movie, which was the remake from 2013. I know this movie has its fans, and I hadn't seen it since it first came out. But for me, it didn't quite work as much as I would have liked it to. It felt like it was trying to recreate a more extreme Evil Dead movie without being as new or creative as I would like from this series. Though, interest was starting to peak for me after hearing a lot of praise this film has been getting, including statements on the level saying that this film is the most Evil Dead movie we've had in the best way possible. It seems like everyone was really praising this movie. Well, almost everyone.
I think that's what happened. Yeah. What are you doing here? Get the fuck out of here.
So, with such a high bar this film establishes, how is Evil Dead Rise? While I wasn't expecting to reach quite the heights of Evil Dead 2, I think this film does a really great job of reinventing the Evil Dead franchise, and that's because, unlike the remake, this did a lot more to differentiate itself from the other films in the series. It still takes the premise of characters being trapped inside somewhere and having to fight off zombies created from the Book of the Dead. Yet, it's the small changes that give it more an identity. Instead of taking place in the cabin in the woods, it takes place in an apartment complex. And instead of a group of friends, it's a family dealing with a single mom and her sister as the main leads. It changes the premise ever so slightly, but you get an Evil Dead movie that still retains a lot of the gore, over-the-top nature, and creepy atmosphere that the very best films of this series are known for. Granted, the remake did the same sort of thing by having a lot of gore, possibly more than this movie, though this film certainly has some squeamish moments in that department, that's for sure. However, I think what really elevated this movie more than that film is the fact that I got more into the characters this time around. In the remake, none of the casts really stood out to me. It might be because it's been so long since I've seen it, but I can't really think of anything that defines these characters that well outside of what the role was in the film. In Evil Dead Rise, they give you just enough to know about these characters to where you care a little bit about their struggles. And the fact that this time it's a family does add to this. You see each character's bond and dynamic with one another, making you feel a lot more when a character gets axed at one point. It helps by a ton of really great performances where I felt all the actors were very believable in their roles and all felt genuine when acting off one another. The highlight being Alyssa Sutherland, who does a really great job flipping back and forth between being possessed and being a caring mother to various manipulative degrees. And that's not even including the incredible makeup as well. In fact, this movie in general just has an awesome look to it, with the cinematography being the absolute highlight. So many impressive shots that feel right in line with the camera work of the old movies. Not just with the movements of the camera, but also how the shots and lighting really give out the feel that this brutal, relentless journey has to offer. It goes more in the horror realm like the remake than comedy. Admittedly, I do ultimately prefer my Evil Dead movies to have a bit more comedy compared to something like this, but this movie is not devoid of the sick, twisted humor we're used to, and I'm able to take it seriously thanks to how well done it all is, and how much I actually do care for these characters. Really, the one issue I have, without spoiling too much, is that there are a few scenes in the beginning and end that feel a little tacked on. Like, there's a bit of focus on characters who don't really have a big part in this movie, which the scenes themselves do have some good aspects, including a great title drop. At the same time though, there is a feeling like it didn't need to 100% be there due to how little it has to do with the plot of the movie itself. Minus that though, I still think this film is consistently enjoyable for horror fans. Plus, it also does a good job being its own thing, as I'm not sure where it lands in the Evil Dead timeline. It doesn't really make any sort of connections to any of the other movies outside of a few references that aren't too overbearing, just small nods here and there. It doesn't try to constantly be a throwback to the point where only fans could get it, and nor does it do anything that really deviates from the norm in a negative way. This is very much what you would expect from Evil Dead. A good horror romp that manages to have fun with a simple premise. I recommend checking this one out if you're a fan of the series, and also if you're into good horror as well. If this is a movie that can introduce more people to the masterpiece that is Evil Dead 2 in a good way, then I say it's certainly worth your time, so take that for what it's worth. And I'm gonna give Evil Dead Rise an 8 out of 10. The other big movie I saw over the past week was Beau is Afraid. Beau is Afraid was certainly one of my most anticipated movies of 2023. A24 definitely was on fire last year with all the great pieces of work they had put out, and I was hoping this year would be no exception. The first major film I was keeping an eye on from them was this one, as it's from Ari Aster, the guy who did Hereditary and Midsommar. Both of these movies were not only really great, but they were different and unique in the horror genre compared to what else we have been seeing at the time of their release. Naturally, a new film from the guy who can create something as memorable as those films within the span of 2 years is one to look out for. Not to mention the fact that this film had a great cast with good old Joaquin Phoenix lined up as the leading man for this role, and more importantly, it has my boy, Nathan Lane. Yeah, it's been way too long since this dude has been in the movie, and as I mentioned in my Teacher's Pet video, I hope this film could give him a comeback. So, with all that said and done, how is Beau is Afraid? Well, you see, this is harder than it really needs to be. Not because I dislike this movie or anything, far from it. It's actually quite good. But in terms of what I saw, this is without a doubt one of the most bizarre things I have ever sat down in a theater for 3 hours for. That's getting this much of a big push. If I could say one thing, I think this film convinced me that Ari Aster was created in a lab by David Lynch and Charlie Kaufman, because that's the only way I can think of to how something like Beau is Afraid exists. It is really out there when it comes to shit you would see in a film. And even comparing it to Kaufman and Lynch isn't really doing justice on what's the best way to describe this movie. How is it so weird? Well, for starters, while I think most are expecting a horror film with something like this movie isn't really that. There are definitely horror elements, but not nearly to the degree as Aster's previous 2 films. If anything, this plays more out like a black comedy. And when I mean black comedy, I mean like some of the darkest comedy you will probably ever see in a movie. There are a lot of moments that made me laugh, sure, but what I was laughing at was some of the most shocking and kind of fucked up stuff that could have ever been considered as comedy. However, strangely enough, it all felt intentional and does kind of work when you see how bizarre and awkward it can be in the vein of something like a David Lynch film. Also, narratively wise, it feels like something out of a Charlie Kaufman film in the sense that you don't really get a lot explained to you in this. It'll be something that will frustrate some moviegoers because this film doesn't give you a whole lot of answers on why certain things are happening within the film. But much like a Charlie Kaufman movie, as random as it might seem, it's all a way to give you a sense of what this character is feeling. You don't get things explained to you because you're in this with the leading characters. But I think with Aster's directing, it ends up being pulled off very well. One of the big strengths of this movie is the fact that Ari Aster is at the top of his game when it comes to directing. The way scenes are and play out might seem disjointed to some, And in fact, some might say this film is overindulgent. Yet the craftsmanship you have seen in Hereditary and Midsommar are still intact, as this film is filled with so much incredible production design, cinematography, sound design, and atmosphere that really made Aster's nightmare fantasy something to truly be immersed in. It has some of my favorite sequences in any movie this year so far, including an incredible animation sequence that is gorgeous for every frame. Plus, also like Aster's previous work, he does work great with actors, as there are a ton of excellent performances. Joaquin Phoenix has always been an actor that chooses very interesting roles and does a great job at it, and here is no exception. He plays a sad middle-aged man clearly going through some sort of psychotic episode and pulls it off really well with the amount of anxiety you can just see within his face that is prevalent throughout the whole movie. Another standout is Patti LuPone, who, fun fact, I know her best as the voice of Yellow Diamond on Steven Universe. She essentially plays Beau's mom, who is very fierce in so many sequences, and much like Toni Collette in Hereditary, you can sense the amount of resentment this character feels in every scene, especially towards the final moments of this film. The rest of the cast are all great here, being simultaneously funny and scary at the same time throughout the entire 3-hour runtime. My personal favorite being, no surprise, Nathan Lane, who is so delightful in this movie in so many ways. If nothing else, I hope this encourages more studios to bring him back in movies, because seeing him here really made me miss him dearly. In this film, he practically refers to Joaquin Phoenix as my dude. That alone is worth the price of admission, and it's something I never knew I actually needed in my life until now. So yeah, this is one wild movie, and is one I certainly can see not appealing to everyone. Not only is this a long movie, but also it's one that has such a strange tone and gets pretty extreme when it comes to the subject matter, visuals, and just all-around vibe the film has overall. It doesn't feed you a lot of answers and probably will give you more questions. It is quite a disturbing film that isn't for the faint of heart. For me, there was nothing quite as disturbing on the level of the last mind of a horror film A24 made last year with the last 15 minutes of Men. However, there was one scene that came very, very close. But I ain't telling you what that is. See the movie for yourself if you want to know. Though, it still manages to be a very uncomfortable film, and one that's fairly bleak in a lot of parts. Yet, all of it does feel intentional. Call Ari Aster pretentious if you want for something like this, but at the very least, the biggest praise I can give to this movie is that it really isn't like anything else I've seen before. Maybe to its detriment, but as someone who loves seeing filmmakers take risks, I adore the fact that something like Beau is Afraid exists. It is one of the strangest movies I've seen this year for sure, but will be one I will probably remember for a good chunk of this year. I think Midsommar still might be his best work thus far, but the ambition seen alone here is worth your time in my opinion. Beau is Afraid is funny, scary, and most importantly, unique. Certainly will be an experience that you won't find anywhere else this year, so take that for what it's worth. And I'm gonna give Beau is Afraid a 9 out of 10. So yeah, those are my thoughts on both Evil Dead Rise and Beau is Afraid. What did you happen to think about those movies if you happen to see them? Comment below, let me know, hit that red subscribe button for more updates, and I'll see you guys again in the near future. Later.